So
Hi.
facing you, but they're back. There you go.
There they are.
Mhm.
How's everybody doing today? Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Well, I am Chris Buurma, and I'm a scientist. In particular, I'm a computational physicist, which means most of the time I spend my time using computers and physics to understand how the world works at the smallest levels, like microscopic atoms. My favorite things to think about are normally tiny nanoscale objects made out of just a couple atoms at a time. I work on sensor systems so we can figure out how the world is working from a distance. And I work on artificial intelligence, which is a way of teaching robots and machines to think like we do. There are lots of different kinds of scientists. Some of them work in schools and colleges, and they'll normally teach other people. And other ones work at companies and they make inventions. And I'm the inventing kind. So I spend most of my time inventing new stuff. There's also two other kind of flavors of scientists. Some of them spend their days experimenting on the world. They'll probe it with, lasers and test equipment and voltages. And then the other flavor tends to sit around thinking most of the time and doing math and equations. And I'm much more of a thinker. They don't let me touch the lasers. They're afraid I'm going to hurt something. So I spend most of my time writing equations and ideas and kind of testing how the world works. The inventions I'm working on right now are kind of fun. I'm designing an artificial intelligence to help people see when it's really foggy and dusty and snowy. You ever drive through a rainstorm and it was so much rain you couldn't even see out the window like your parents were driving? Yeah. I'm trying to invent a camera that can see through all of that so you don't have to worry about it. I'm also working with NASA to invent sensors that go in satellites so we can orbit the Earth and figure out what's going with climate as the weather changes. And I've also been working on infrared sensors, which are like little cameras that detect heat. And the cameras are so inexpensive, you could buy one for the price of a McDonald's lunch meal. So it's pretty good. Right now, they're pretty expensive and only really, expensive people have them. But the ones I'm inventing should be really cheap and everybody can have one. So that's been the fun stuff I've been working on lately. But mostly I want to hear from you guys if you have questions for me.
All right, Reese, do you have a question?
Do you want to call on students, Jenny? Since I don't know their names.
You're gonna have to speak really loud, okay? Go ahead. What's your question for Dr. Chris?
How do you work for scientists?
How long have you been a scientist?
That's a good question. So I finished college about 10 years ago, and I first went to college for an undergraduate degree, which means I got my bachelor's degree, which is 4 years of college, basically. And I've done that for about 10 years. But about 4 years ago, I went back to school and learned even more and got my PhD. So now I'm a doctor, which is even fancier. So I've been doing science for probably about 10 years now.
Okay.
Wow. Who else? Derek, do you have a question? Big loud voice.
How much are the cameras gonna cost?
Oh, you got him on the cameras, Dr. Chris.
I know, it's good. So currently cameras are these infrared cameras, the ones that see the heat, cost about $20,000 to $50,000. The prototype we invented costs $6.
What?
Not too bad, right? Not too bad. So in the old days, they would make the cameras by growing the atoms one atom at a time in a perfect row. And they got them all perfect, all the way up. But it was really expensive because you had to wait a long time for all the atoms to settle out, right? Our new one uses quantum dots, which is kind of like peanut butter. So you've got like a big jar with a bunch of goo in it, and we take out the peanut butter chemicals and we spread it onto a piece of silicon, which is kind of like electronic circuits. And the quantum dots start rearranging themselves automatically. And they sort of automatically click into that perfect shape that we want. And then when we're done, we just connect it up to the camera and it works. So it was pretty fun.
Wow. All right, Sadhu, go first.
What's your favorite thing about being a scientist?
My favorite thing about being a scientist, ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to know how the world worked. I was always really curious, why do things make sounds when I hit them? Where do colors come from? And the best part about being a scientist is that every day I get to ask those questions and keep looking for good answers. And so it's kind of fun. It's like constantly playing the why game. You ever play the why game? But why is this? But why is this? But why is this? I get to do that all day. And so that's really fun.
Awesome. Gabby?
When were you inspired to be a scientist?
Let's see here. I've always been pretty nerdy. I always loved playing computer games and reading books. But probably the biggest change was when I was in high school, about a freshman, which is 9th grade. I got a book from a friend of mine that talked about how scientists view where the universe came from. And the book was really inspiring to me. It was kind of fun to think about, where did all the atoms come from, and why do they combine in certain ways, and where do colors come from, and why does why does the desk heavy if it's made out of wood and light if it's made out of plastic? That's kind of weird. And so after I read through that book, I was really motivated to do science. And so I spent, after high school all the way through college, trying to get education in science so that I could learn from other people how it worked.
Awesome. Dr. Chris, where are you?
I'm in Chicago, the suburbs, just south of Illinois.
Sorry, I never asked you that.
Yeah, no worries. I'm sitting here in the conference room here in our laboratory. I'm at Sivanatha Laboratories, which is like our little inventing company.
Thank you. All right, yeah. What's your name?
Have you ever made robots?
Oh, yes. So this is my passion. I love making robots. Robots are really cool because they can do experiments perfectly. If I program a robot and I'm like, okay, robot, I want you to shoot a laser at this hunk of metal over and over and over until it stops working. The robot's like, yes, sir. And so it's much easier to do that than, let's say, get a friend of mine and say, hey, John, can you just keep firing this laser over and over? Because he's like, oh, this is boring. I want to fire a laser all day. So I spent a lot of my scientific career building robots to do experiments for me.
Yeah.
Why do you like science?
Why do I like science? Well, let's see. I've always liked getting to the bottom of things. Like, what's a good example of that? Why is chocolate so tasty? And a part of me is like, well, I know it's tasty. I've tasted it before. But my science part of my brain says, but why is it tasty? What makes taste things? Like, could I make ketchup taste like chocolate if I wanted to? Can I make vegetables taste like chocolate if I wanted to? And so I like science because, yeah, wouldn't that be cool? So I like science because it lets me have those tools to start picking it apart. I'm like, taste comes from chemicals in my tongue, and chemicals are formed out of atomic bonds. And so the breaking of the bonds is the chocolate flavor. So all I have to do is put those bonds into broccoli, chocolate broccoli. So I like to getting to the bottom of why things are going on. So that's why I really love science, because it gives me the tools to do it.
Cool.
Can you show us something you have made?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, so I'm actually here in the laboratory. I've got a scale model of one of our robot systems I can show you. Hold on a second.
Take pictures, take pictures. I really want to see. Just if I had my iPad.
So this is just a model. The real one is really, really big. It like fits in a whole room. I don't know if you can see it on the camera.
Yeah, hold it up another bit. Nice. Dr. Price, can you hold it up another bit higher, a bit higher over your face?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay.
Whoa.
And what is it?
Yeah.
So this is a machine called molecular beam epitaxy. And what it does is that inside this box, inside this metal box, it has a perfect vacuum, which means it's like the distance between planets. There is no atoms in that box at all. And because we took all the atoms out, all these weird spikes on the outside have the atoms we want. And so I can put any atom I want inside of these little spokes, and they go inside the box, and I can make anything I can imagine, atom by atom.
A dragon.
It's pretty fun because if I wanted to make a turkey sandwich, I wouldn't have to go get a turkey sandwich. I could go to my machine and say, okay, machine, let's put some turkey atoms here and some cheese atoms there and some lettuce atoms here and some bread atoms here. And let's start making our turkey sandwich one atom at a time. So anything I can invent in my brain, I can make in the machine.
Dr. Chris, then can you also simulate the taste? Will the taste be the same as a turkey sandwich?
Oh, that's a fun question. So because these machines are so hard to run and operate, a lot of times they talk to me to simulate it. So first, I'll ask questions like, well, what are turkey atoms made out of and how do they work? And if I make it atom by atom, will it taste differently than if I just go to the store and get a turkey sandwich? And with a simulation, I can solve the physics equations which say how atoms bounce together. Most everything in the world bounces and vibrates, right? Like when atoms kind of bounce together, they get warmer, hotter, colder. And how they put together and come apart is what changes how they look and taste and their shape and color. And so in a simulation, I can ask the question of, well, what kind of bread atoms are the best for my machine? And I can go to my computer and say, try these bread atoms. Now try these bread atoms. Now try these bread atoms. And then I tell my computer, okay, computer, take these calculations over 500 different computers all at the same time and tell me what the answer is. And the computers think about it for a while and they come back with, okay, the atoms are going to be shaped a little differently than you expect, so the flavor might be a little off, but is that okay with you? And then me as a scientist, I have to think, how close of a turkey flavor should I go for? Should I go for the perfect turkey flavor or close to a turkey flavor? So simulations are fun like that because running this machine is really expensive. It takes more electricity than all of the houses on your block. I'd have to turn off everyone's electricity just to run my fancy machine, right? That's expensive. So it's easier to go to my computer and ask questions. Hey, can you simulate what the atoms are doing before we actually turn on the expensive machine? And the computer can do it for me.
Wow. Alexandra?
Do you study about batteries?
Yeah, actually. So about 3 years ago, before I moved into sensors, I worked on energy. So I worked on solar power, solar technology, and batteries. I've always felt that the way we harness energy really defines what we can do. You know, you talk about, we want to build spaceships. And the first question is, well, how are you going to fly them off the planet? Well, I want cars that drive themselves. And well, how are you going to gas up the cars? And how do you charge up the car batteries? And all these really fun ideas you can think of. I want a lightsaber, you know, so I can fight Darth Vader. Well, how do you turn on the lightsaber? It takes too much electricity. Batteries are fun to imagine because you basically take all the electrons, which store the energy, and you kind of crush them up against one side and you hold them in a big bundle. Kind of like when you pick up something heavy off the ground and you lift it up and you hold it there as long as you can. And they're like, okay, you guys ready for the energy? You ready? Drop. And that's where all the energy comes from. Batteries work on the exact same way.
Oh, like I was thinking, like I always had this question in my mind, like when you put 2 batteries in the refrigerator and you put batteries outside, and if it's like really hot outside, will it affect the energy for the batteries?
Totally. In fact, there's a cool trick for you. Ready? If you're playing on your cell phone, your electronics, and the battery dies and it turns off and it doesn't work. If you take your battery and you cool it down, like you put it in the freezer or you put it in liquid nitrogen, which is what I get to do, which is fun, it'll actually get charged again. So why is that, right? Why? So everything's made out of atoms, and in a dead battery, all of the atoms are kind of sitting at the bottom instead of being held up, ready to fall. And the falling is what makes the energy, right? When you cool it down, all the bouncing of the atoms starts to slow down because everything gets really cold and you don't want to go anywhere. Well, the atoms that were bouncing first will stay up. And then as everybody freezes, there's a couple of atoms that are kind of bounced up, which means I can let them go and get energy. So it will totally make a difference if your battery is hot or cold. Do you ever notice if you're using an electronic for a while, the battery gets really hot? Or like if you have a laptop and you're using it for a while and it gets really, really hot? You ever notice that? All of the energy in the battery that goes on to turn on my laptop and play my video games, a little bit of it gets wasted as heat, and all that heat comes out. So if you cool the battery down, you can actually get a little bit of extra juice out of it, which is kind of fun.
Gabby?
How long does it take you to build a robot?
Depends how big they are. Let me think here. The fastest robot I ever built took about 1 day. We bought these little computers for about $35, and then we bought these little engines and motors, and we just plugged them all in together. And then you wrote some software to teach the robot to, let's say, drive in a circle. And it took, maybe an hour to program it all. And I'm like, oh, I'm all done in an hour. But that robot didn't drive in a circle. He drove straight and crashed into the wall. And I'm like, oh, that's not going to work. So I spent a lot of time trying to teach the robot, no, make sure to turn left, don't hit the walls. And that's what took the rest of the day. So the fastest robot probably took about a day. Some of the really, really big ones we have in the laboratory, we probably built those over about 2 or 3 months. And they took a lot of other scientists working together to make them.
Wow. Frankie, go for it.
What would happen if the Earth's inner core had space to melt?
So I missed the last word. What happened if the Earth did what?
Had space to melt. The Earth's inner core had space to melt.
What if the Earth's center core had space to melt?
Oh, ooh, that's a fun one. So the center of the Earth has all this molten metal inside of it, right?
Yeah.
All that molten metal spins in a circle, and normally it's made out of nickel, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
All that nickel moves all electrons in a big circle and makes this huge magnetic field around the planet. Well, if you crack the Earth open and you blew on all of that hot molten metal and let it cool down into a solid core, well, you turn into what Mars turned into. They don't have a solid core, and that beautiful magnetic field we have disappears. And everyone's like, well, I don't use the magnetic field. What do I need that for? Turns out the sun is kind of a jerk. The sun sends all kinds of dangerous radiation at us, and the magnetic field pushes it away like a magic shield. And so whenever these high energy particles come towards the Earth, the magnetic field just turns them away. Poor Mars, though, doesn't have that. And so poor Mars gets hit all day with the sun. So if somebody were to cool down the center of the Earth and that molten metal all of a sudden just turned solid and didn't go anywhere, the Earth would be like, uh-oh, guys, the shields are down. Here come all of the sun's dangerous radiation. I hope you guys are going to be okay. So it would definitely not be a good thing. We'd have to get an army of scientists to get back down to the middle of the Earth and melt it again.
Derek, go for it.
One thing about the little cameras again. Where will they be located to buy?
Where can you buy your cameras, Chris?
Also,
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I have 2 questions. One of them is, where would you buy the cameras? Where would you buy the cameras?
Oh, where do you buy the cameras? Good question. So right now they're prototypes. Prototypes means that I can make them in the laboratory, and it takes me about an hour to cook up the peanut butter that I make. And then once I'm done, I spread it on the cells, and then I sell them. So right now, if 10 people all wanted to buy one, well, it would take me all day to make them. Well, imagine if 1,000 people wanted to buy them, or 100,000 people. Oh my gosh, I don't have enough time in the day to build that. So what do I need to do? Build a robot to make them for me, which is what we're doing right now. So until that robot is built to make these cameras for me, we can't really sell them very fast because we wouldn't be able to make them as fast as people wanted them. So when we'll be able to buy one? Probably the next year or two. If I can get that robot built this year, we can start doing tests next year to make sure our experiments work. And then by the year after that, you'll be able to buy them. So probably before you go to high school, all of a sudden there'll be these really cheap cameras that can see in the dark. And that'll be pretty fun.
Awesome. Marco, do you have a question?
How often do you fix things? How often do you fix things?
Oh my gosh, all the time. When you do computational physics, you sit around a lot of time thinking about stuff, and you write it down on paper, and you think, okay, how does the universe work? What will happen if I do this? What will happen if I do this? And when you're done thinking and you want to test something, you either go to your computer and you type a bunch of code up that simulates the world, and that code does not work on the first try, let me tell you. You ever try to build something brand new out of Legos, and you're like, it doesn't look exactly how I wanted it to look, but it's still pretty good? Same thing in computers. So I'll normally have to test it and fix it. And then after I fix it, I'm like, this works. And it'll work great for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then one day someone will be like, hey, you know, your code doesn't work if I type in the letter Z. And I'm like, oh, why did you type in the letter Z? And then I have to program it again and fix it. So fixing stuff is part of learning how it works. You have to know how it works or you can't fix it.
How do you been to the crust?
How do I fix the what?
Have you been to the crust?
Have you been to the Earth's crust?
Well, I'm standing on the Earth's crust right now, but I've not been through it. It's kind of funny. Some people were trying to break through the Earth's crust to see if they could touch the mantle. We've only ever seen the mantle in computer pictures picked up by big pulses of energy we send through the Earth, and we watch as the pulses move and they bounce off the mantle. And so one of the scientists were like, what if we could go down there and get a scoop of the mantle, like a handful? Wouldn't that be cool? We could study that. And so they drilled and they drilled and they drilled, and they went under the Marianas Trench even. They're like, what if we keep drilling in here? Or we found this caldera in Russia. They're like, what if we dug a huge hole in there? And they dug down like miles and miles and miles. Like if you fell in this hole, you'd be falling for like 10 minutes and you'd get bored on the way down. And they didn't even get through the crust that time. They thought about it, they're like, well, how far did we make it? Not even a fourth of the way, not even a fifth of the way. And so the scientists are like, man, I don't think we're going to get into that crust unless somebody accidentally cracks the Earth open. So now we're back to this other idea of running simulations and testing the Earth with pulses of sound instead of light waves. Yeah?
Alex, how much percentage of the ocean scientists found? Like,
very little. Something like 5 or 10%, if I remember correctly. Maybe less than that. The ocean is one of those big frontiers, partially because, well, there's so much water. It's kind of hard to do experiments in it. Water is really, really heavy. You ever carry like a bucket of water, you know, around in the summertime? Kind of heavy, right? Well, imagine if you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of buckets all on top of your head all the time. A lot of times what scientists used to do is they get on special scuba suits and special submarines, and they'd go down as deep as they could, and they would study the ocean to figure out what it's made out of. But now that we've invented robots, we can build special robots that can survive all the heavy, heavy water. And about 4 or 5 years ago, they got the first ever pictures where it's so deep underwater, there's no light at all. And we got to see all these cool fish that you've never seen before. And so a lot of the ocean scientists are really excited because now that we've invented all these cool robots, they can finally explore down at the bottom of the ocean where they could never go before. So it's a brand new field. If it's something you're interested in, we need a lot more ocean scientists. We're running out.
Should we take one more question, Chris, and then we'll have to shut it down. I think we could go all day, but does anyone one last question for Dr. Chris? Yep, go ahead, Derek.
Do you like cats?
Do I like cats? Yes. I have a cat, Professor Snoopy, of course. And he's big orange Maine Coon cat, and that cat runs the house, I'll tell you what. I come home and he's like, I want my dinner. And I'm like, okay, sir, no problem.
What do we say to Dr. Chris?
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope you guys had fun. Keep learning, keep asking questions.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
All right.
have a nice day.
I'll leave the meeting.